an interfaith conversation on faith, justice, and ways in which we might partner and work with the Biden-Harris administration. We're really grateful for this really inspiring panel. People who probably do not need any introduction, but we'll share who's with us. We've got Rabbi David Saperstein, Dr. Davie Almontaser, Dr. James Zogby, Bishop Yvette Flunder, Reverend Frederick Davie, and Josh Dickson from the Biden-Harris transition. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Fred. Fred.
Thank you, Adam. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this conversation about faith and the Biden-Harris administration. Union Seminary is really pleased to partner with Faith 2020, as well as our panelists, all of whom are distinguished in their own right, and Adam will introduce them to you shortly. But really, Union Theological Seminary is really pleased, as am I, to be able to join this conversation. Interfaith, interreligious work is at the heart of the seminary and its mission. And we are pleased to have an opportunity to have this conversation before the start of the Biden-Harris administration, and then to join the administration in its efforts to advance interfaith cooperation, interfaith work, interfaith conversations, hopefully throughout its 4 years and beyond. One of the people who's at the center of that, of course, is Josh Dickson. Josh is currently he has a dual role on the transition, on the Biden-Harris transition. He is, in addition to being the liaison to the U.S. Department of Education in the transition, he is also obviously the liaison to the faith community for the transition, and we're so glad that he's in that role. Prior to this, just prior, Josh, of course, was the Director of National Faith Outreach for the Biden-Harris campaign. And we might be a little biased in saying this. We think he did an extraordinary job. And he had a great role to play in that victory. And we're very pleased about that. And then prior to that, he'd worked with the Obama administration in the Department of Commerce, where he ran the faith office there. So we, on behalf of Union Theological Seminary, the president of Union Seminary, Reverend Dr. Serene Jones, we are very pleased to be joining you all for this conversation. And I will turn it over to Josh Dickson.
Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you, Adam. Really appreciate Faith 2020 and Union hosting this conversation. It's great to be here with such an esteemed panel. And I bring greetings on behalf of the President-elect, the Vice President-elect, and our entire team. We are really, really thrilled to be able to participate and hear from folks. And, you know, one thing that I'll say, just to Fred's point about the campaign, is it was such a team effort. And, you know, one of the things that was a key priority coming from President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris was ensuring that we had a historically inclusive, robust, diverse outreach and engagement strategy that really elevated the voices of as many religious communities as we possibly could, not only in our faith engagement work, but in an integrated way throughout all of our engagement work. That's why you saw faith voices represented in our Latinx outreach, in our African American outreach, in our AAPI outreach, in our Native outreach, and in so many different spaces, in women's outreach and youth outreach. And for us, you know, we really think it is critically important to elevate voices of every possible community and ensure that we are working as hard as we can towards that idea of Imago Dei, towards that idea that we're all created in the image of God with inherent human dignity and worth, something that the president-elect talked about a lot in the campaign, and it's something that really centers his approach, centers his agenda and his commitment to the common good. So I'm just starting off with a huge note of thanks to all the folks who are joining today, who participated in this work on the campaign, and, you know, who continue be partners, because we know that winning this campaign was the first step in bending that great moral arc of the universe in the right direction, but it's not the only step. And that we need to continue to work together towards so many of the things that you're going to hear about today, from folks who've worked on these issues for years and decades, and who really have made tremendous progress using their witness and their platforms in the cause of prophetic justice. So just want to start off with this note of thanks to all of you. I also just want to say, on behalf of our incoming president-elect and vice president-elect, they're folks who are deeply committed to so many of the issues that are important to people of faith in this country, to really, really working towards a preferential option for the poor, to really, really working towards addressing poverty head on, really working on centering racial equity and addressing systemic racism in so many of the wrongs that have been a part of the history of our country. They are a ticket that is looking to make history on a multitude of fronts, from addressing climate change and immigration to ensuring that we have just policies when it comes to our national defense, our foreign policy, and the like. And on so many fronts, they are deeply committed to equity and justice. And so we're very much looking forward to partnering with everyone who's tuning in now, everyone who will watch this recording. And we know that this is a movement that it's only going to work if we do it together. And in this moment of deep division, in this moment where on Saturday night we saw historic Black churches vandalized in DC, in this moment of deep division, we know that it's going to take all of us coming together to really address those divides and bring the type of leadership that's needed, as well as the type of grace that's needed. And so just want to, again, thank you all for having us as a part of this conversation. I do want to touch on a handful of key things on behalf of the transition. We're working really hard to engage with a really diverse, broad set of stakeholders right now on a multitude of issues. We've met with hundreds and hundreds of faith groups, and we are continuing to. Many of the folks in this call have participated in these meetings, and we're really aiming right now in listening mode to get input. And really to start off with hearing from you all, hearing from the things that you are experiencing and seeing in your communities, the issues that are important to the constituencies and groups that you all work with and for. And so that's been our starting point, is having a posture of listening. And we're really trying to ensure that we're also being accessible and that. So collecting input, written input from thousands and thousands of groups and individuals and organizations. So we'll make sure to provide ways for you all to send that our way on the transition side at the close of this meeting. But we just want to make sure that you all know we're really focused right now on doing the deeply important work of ensuring that the recommendations that we're putting forward for the transition and for this incoming administration are values-driven recommendations that deeply represent where there are clear areas of priority for people of faith in this country. So we're grateful to you all for being a part of that. And then I just want to say, you can check out information on our website at buildbackbetter.gov. That's where we give kind of a line of sight into, we have 4 really anchoring day one priorities. The agenda is not exclusive to those priorities, but they're things that have been central to the work and the campaign of the president-elect and vice president-elect. Those are racial equity, COVID response, economic recovery, and climate change, things that are all deeply, deeply pressing issues. That said, we're working with folks on a multitude of different issues right now and having conversations on a whole bunch of different fronts. And so, again, we welcome your input. We would love to continue to receive materials and policy papers and things like that. And then for folks who are interested in things on the personnel front, interested in roles in new administration, obviously we're going to have a lot of jobs to fill. We're looking for talented people to fill those. And so there's information that I'll share. I'll share a link in the chat about that as well, where you can apply and express your interest and put your candidacy forward. So I'm excited for this conversation. I'm going to turn it back to Adam and Fred, but I hope that just everyone knows the panel who we're going to hear from today is just a tremendous group of leaders who are trailblazers on so many fronts, who represent so many different incredible experiences and work. I personally am thrilled to hear from them, and I know that all of the things that they're going to share today are very important to the president-elect and vice president-elect as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Adam, and excited for this conversation.
Adam, you are on mute.
Thanks, Fred. You'd think that having done this for 8 months, I would know how to unmute myself. Welcome. If you're just joining us, my name is Reverend Adam Phillips. I'm Executive Director of Faith 2020. This is our second of many conversations with the interfaith, big tent, multi-faith community of leaders and the Biden-Harris transition. So we're really grateful for this panel. First up is Rabbi David Saperstein, designated by Newsweek magazine as the most influential rabbi in America and by the Washington Post as the quintessential religious lobbyist on Capitol Hill for 40 years as director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. Rabbi Saperstein represented to Congress and the administration the Reform Jewish movement, the largest segment of American Jewry. Under Rabbi Saperstein, writes J.J. Goldberg in his book, Jewish Power, the Religious Action Center has become one of the most powerful Jewish bodies in Washington, second only to AIPAC. During the second term of the Obama administration, Rabbi Saperstein also served as the United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, carrying out his responsibilities as the country's chief diplomat on religious freedom issues. In this capacity, he served as a principal advisor to Secretary Kerry and President Obama on issues of international religious freedom. We're really grateful that Rabbi Saperstein could be with us today.
I'm delighted to be here. And first, Josh, you did a fantastic job. You really did. And we really look forward to working with you in the future as well. And to Fred and Adam, thank you for your leadership in this effort, as you've been leaders in so many ways over the years. I'm speaking simultaneously, and I'll try to distinguish for my own segment of the Jewish community, the Reform Jewish movement, and also a sense descriptively of where the Jewish community is writ large. For so many of us, racial justice and civic engagement over these last 6 months have been at the center of everything that we've been involved with domestically here in the United States. For us, there was a huge civic engagement component to our work, and the racial justice filter continues to infuse the policy work we do, as well as much of the programmatic and organizational work within our own community. We're deeply alarmed by the shift in the courts and the fact that the courts seem to be lost for a generation as a protector of fundamental rights, ensuring that this is not something that will continue over the next decades, moving assertively to fill what slots are open now is a central concern that we have. On a broader level, in terms of the role of religion in the policy work and programmatic work of the administration, we really want to commend the report that Melissa Rogers and E.J. Dion did. We think it really is a good guide. I think it has consensus support from large segments of the religious communities with which you've been engaged over the last period of time and will be engaged with. Obviously, with all of us, immigration reform, gun violence, a whole range of issues that we've worked on with the Obama-Biden administration will be front and center. We hope in efforts that will continue, but certainly economic justice on the domestic front. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of a package over the next couple of weeks, but I think we all know that even with a package, and absolutely without a package, we face a catastrophe if the eviction protections dissipate at the end of this month. We're going to have a housing crisis in the middle of the winter, unlike anything that we have seen, surpassing the problems that we saw at the heart of the homelessness crisis 20 years ago. and we saw after 2008. We already have a hunger crisis that will be greatly beginning worse, because the package, even if it does go through, will not be at the levels that sustain people at the end. It won't have, again, we need the eviction protection and support for landlords, particularly smaller landlords, so that the entire housing market doesn't begin to dissipate. On the international front, we withdrew from leadership in the world, reasserting that leadership. I will tell you, as someone who traveled widely over these last years, everywhere we withdrew from, you found the Chinese and the Russians filling the void that we left. And we need to reassume leadership of the institutions we built at the end of World War II, of the regional institutions that we have walked away from, and stronger bilateral economic and political cooperation. The growth of authoritarianism, the dissipation of our efforts on behalf of human rights is a real setback. Other than religious freedom, very little attention was given to any human rights structure, and millions and millions and millions of human beings' lives are made worse off, and particularly the vulnerable people who are the dissenters, the protesters, those who stand up to growing authoritarianism desperately need our support here. One word about religious freedom. International religious freedom, which doesn't raise the civil rights versus religious freedom claims we have in the United States. Here, it really is one of the few bipartisan issues that are readily available, and keeping a strong presence in that and rebuilding the human rights up to that level seems to me to be the right way to go. I think there are greater opportunities, which we can talk about offline on some of this, Josh, but crucially important. And for the Jewish community writ large, here, continued engagement in the Middle East, vitally important. Israel's security, overwhelming consensus in religious communities of America, but in the Jewish community too, that a Palestinian state, the two-state solution based on a Palestinian state with contiguity of its landmass within the 67 borders, absolutely indispensable to security in the long run, and using the Abraham Accords as ways to bring others into support of a resolution of the Israeli-Palestine conflict, vitally important. So a quick overview of the concerns of many in the Jewish community, and I know we share many with my colleagues that you're going to hear from, who have played such important roles in their communities on these very same issues.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Saperstein. A really important word, especially on hunger and evictions and religious freedom. It's an interfaith bipartisan issue, all of these sets. I'm happy to introduce next Dr. Debbie Almontaser, who is an internationally recognized award-winning educator, entrepreneur, speaker, authority on cross-cultural understanding, and author of Leading While Muslim. She is founder and CEO of Bridging Cultures Group Incorporated, a for-profit business that provides professional development and coaching for companies, nonprofits, universities, firms, and K-12 education personnel. She's the founding and former principal of the Khalil Gibran International Academy in Brooklyn. A 25-year veteran of the NYC public school system, she's taught special education, inclusion, trained teachers in literacy. She is an incredibly foundational leader in the world of education and inclusion in our country, not just in New York City. She's an advisor on cultural and religious diversity issues for public advocate Jumani Williams, Borough President Eric Adams, and the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. She's also organized numerous interfaith and cultural events to develop cross-cultural understanding locally and nationally. Dr. Almentaser is also known for her leadership role in organizing the historic Yemeni Bodega Strike Rally and I Am a Muslim Too rally in resistance to the Muslim ban. We are so honored and grateful for Dr. Almentaser joining us today.
Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you so much, Josh, for the incredible work that you have done. And also Reverend Dr. Davie for always being a partner and making sure that all of our voices are at the table. As an American Muslim and also proud Yemeni American, I'm truly honored and humbled to be here with all of you and have this opportunity to share with you what are the important things to me as an American Muslim, as well as my community, both the American Muslim community, the Yemeni American community, and most importantly, all immigrants in the United States. And as I was going through my wardrobe, deciding what to wear for today, this is what I decided to wear, and I want everybody to see. It says, "I am an immigrant." I'm sorry, it's showing the other way. This was a campaign that was launched to re-embrace the importance of how this land was actually created by immigrants. And we need to reclaim that. And each and every one of us sitting on this call and people watching all over, we are all immigrants. We need to embrace that. We need to make sure that that is the primary concern for the President-elect Biden and his team, to understand that we need to make sure that this country is friendly to immigrants coming, whether they've come just last week, last month, last year, 100 years ago, or 1,400 years ago. This is their home. This is what is important for us to center and make sure that we are welcoming everyone that comes to our shores. And ensuring that this is a home for all people. What I wanted to focus on was three things, and those three things, particularly focusing on immigration as well as education. I wanted to start off by shining a light on the FBI's hate crime data. We cannot have conversations without making sure that hate crimes are front and center for people to understand the seriousness and what we as a nation must do to ensure that we are working collectively to bring these hate crimes down. And so last year, the FBI released the 2019 FBI hate crimes data. And what we saw was that 2019 was the deadliest year on record, with the most violent incidents since 2001, when a surge of incidents was reported in the wake of 9/11 terrorist attacks. It is crucial that President-elect Biden understands what is happening in our nation and how this all came about. According to the FBI's annual hate crime statistics report, the data collected from state, tribal, local, and now federal law enforcement agencies, there were actually 7,314 crime incidents reported in 2019, marking a slight increase from the 7,120 incidents that were reported in 2018. Now, mind you, this is not, national. Law enforcement agencies reported 51 hate crime homicides, more than double the amount reported in 2018, then the highest on record. In addition, with 1,364 violent offenses reported in 2019, this is really, terrifying to understand. Now, I want to also shine a light on who are the victims of these hate crimes. There was a 9% increase in reported anti-Hispanic hate crime incidents. This increase did not include the mass shootings of August 3rd in El Paso, Texas, where a gunman opened fire on Walmart, killing 22 individuals. It is crucial that we understand, all of this is connected. What we have seen happening at the southern border, the anti-immigrant sentiment specifically targeting Hispanics and the Latinx community, is certainly the reason that we see this spike in the Hispanic community. There was a 14% increase in anti-Jewish hate crime, included in the second highest number of violent offenses. The first highest occurred in 2018. Anti-Semitism is alive and well, and we have to challenge it every time it creeps its ugly head. There was also a 24% increase in anti-bisexual hate crimes targeting the LGBTQIA community. Again, this is just startling to see this. The greatest number of anti-Black or African-American hate crime offenses reported since 2011 the 11,328 violent crime offenses accounted for nearly 50% of violent hate crime offenses reported in the 2019 data. At 1,930 reported incidents, anti-Black or African-American hate crimes also counted for a plurality of all reported incidents and a majority of incidents motivated by race. Again, this is startling to learn and understand. With 108 reported incidents in 2019, a record number of hate crime incidents motivated by anti-mental disability was also reported by the FBI. Again, what is happening to people who are dealing with mental health illnesses? We really need to be cognizant of this. Also, the FBI documented a record high number of 52 anti-women hate crimes, an over 100% increase since 2018. Following that, anti-transgender hate crimes increased by 6%, and anti-gender non-conforming increased by an alarming 81%. And I also just want to include here that, let's see, did I skip over the Muslim? I'm sorry, I'm reading as I'm sharing this with you. Sorry, guys. It's just in my notes. The point of it here is that I just want people to understand that, hate crimes, are a huge issue. And the last 4 years, with the white supremacy, the anti-immigrant, the anti-Arab, the anti-Muslim has really created this hotbed of hate that we have to challenge. I have to mention the Muslims. So there was a decrease record of recorded for anti-Muslim hate crimes with 176 incidents reported. However, the anti-Muslim hate crimes have yet decreased beyond pre-2015 numbers, when over 70% was increased, had increased actually, was documented. So the point here is that we need to address this level of hate and what is happening in our country. The way to do it is, through our education and making sure that this is a top priority for our, elected officials, for President-elect Biden. And how can we go about this? We need to introduce on a national level in a K-12 education setting, culturally responsive education. This is the way to help better understand how do we address the needs of our students and making sure that they know who their classmates are. We could do this by also incorporating religious literacy, which has actually been recognized by the National Social Studies Council as an imperative to be incorporated within the Common Core and the C3 frameworks of social studies. Students should have the right to know who their neighbors are, who their peers are in their classroom, what religious background they are, how do they practice. The only way that we are going to be able to humanize one another is when we talk and we share our experiences. In addition, we also have to increase ethnic and racial studies at universities and in K-12. It is imperative that we help one another better understand all of these communities and really be able to do so through education. Lastly, I want to also include the importance of incorporating anti-racism training in all agencies, and starting with law enforcement. Law enforcement needs to have this kind of training. Implicit bias is also critical for all sectors, to make sure that we are able to check our biases at the door and be able to work collectively. And so these are really important things that I felt that I needed to bring to this discussion and to really emphasize for all of us who are here, and especially for the Biden transition team, to really understand that the only way that we are going to be able to bring healing to our nation is by addressing what has happened in the last 4 years and start to build by embracing one another's race, religion, culture, sexual orientation, and have each and every person see themselves and the other, as many of our scriptures have talked about and have taught us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Almontaser. Really, really important word and really hopeful word amidst all of the challenges of the last 4 years, and that we can really change the trajectory here. I just want to elevate a comment from Azar Aziz in our chat. He says, as an FYI, Islamic Relief USA has been doing incredible humanitarian work in Yemen and 40 other countries around the world, also doing important domestic work. Please check out irusa.org and be sure that you're up to date on all the really important work that Islamic Relief is up to. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. James Zogby. He's the author of Arab Voices and the founder and president of the Arab American Institute, AAI, a Washington, D.C. based organization which serves as the political and policy research arm of the Arab American community. Since 1985, Dr. Zogby and AAI have led Arab American efforts to secure political empowerment in the U.S. Through voter registration, education, and mobilization. AAI has moved Arab Americans into the political mainstream. Also very incredibly grateful for Dr. Zogby's voice around the campaign in terms of a big tent, multi-faith effort to organize people across the religious spectrum. Really grateful for Dr. Zogby. Without further ado, Dr. Zogby.
Thank you very much, Adam, and thanks to Josh for including me in both the work in the campaign, but also in this panel. And greetings to David, who I've known for probably as many years as I've been doing work in Washington, and to Debbie, who I just so admire her leadership. I don't know you, Bishop Yvette, and Fred. I just get your emails, which I really I value very much. But thanks to all. It's kind of a tough act to follow after Debbie and David, but I have a couple things that I'd like to add. Hopefully that they'll make a contribution to the discussion on hate crimes. Look, Trump is gone, but Trumpism lives on, and I fully expect that we will see the situation aggravated in the years to come. The resentment that he preyed on, and the resentment that he is building even now, have created a situation where I can fully expect that we will see increased hate and increased actions based on that hate. And so it's something we have to take a look at. Debbie quoted the FBI statistics. My office has done a study both of the federal statistics, but also of the state hate crime reporting and legislation that exists on state levels. They're woefully inadequate. What the FBI doesn't include instances that they don't know about. If you take all the state stats and add them together, you get way more than what the FBI has. And so there needs to be a coordinated federal local effort to help us get better reporting and to include groups that are currently not included. We have some legislation that came up last year, passed the House, but we need to push it through this year, the House and the Senate, to increase reporting. One other thing on this is that the culture of hate, the culture of violence and confrontation have, as we have seen, not just stopped as weapons used by groups in society, but they've also crept into our police departments, and they've also crept into law enforcement on the federal level, Customs, Border Patrol, et cetera. There must be, I think, an effort on our part to re-engage something that the Obama administration was doing, and that is local police departments. It's not a question of defunding, it's a question also of addressing the culture of contempt, the culture of disrespect for human life that has become so transformative in the way that law enforcement reacts and relates to communities around the country. That's something where I think religious communities have a very critical role to play. with regard to Customs Border Patrol, we've seen it certainly at the border. We've seen the treatment. I mean, what does it take to pull a child away from a mother? What does it take to, one, order it be done, but two, for people to make it part of their daily life? That's something that ought to concern us. And it's something that we need to address, I think, quite vigorously as we move forward. The laws are one thing, but the way they're implemented and the way that people internalize their relationship with the communities they are supposed to serve but do not, but instead display contempt toward, is something that I think, again, religious communities have to address. That brings me into two policy issues that I think we can deal with. The first is profiling. You know, it took 8 years for Eric Holder to finally deal with profiling. But when he did, he left loopholes. He got rid of the Ashcroft profiling guidelines, but left the loophole of the border and national security. And frankly, Debbie, with regard to our communities, both the Arab and Muslim communities, they mean that the hole that got opened is big enough to drive tanks and trucks through. And certainly it's happened. I mean, if you look at the border, just the Windsor-Detroit connection. I mean, Windsor for many years was a suburb of Detroit. People moved out, like people would move from New York to Nassau County and then to Suffolk County. They moved from Detroit out to Windsor, or they moved to parts in other parts of Michigan. They worked in Detroit, they lived in Windsor, or families, you know, the son would move to Windsor, work in Canada, come back and visit his family, his parents on the weekend. That has stopped. People are afraid to cross the border because of the disgraceful way that Customs Border Patrol deal with Muslims and Arabs at the border. It happens in Newark, it happens in Michigan, happens in Buffalo. These are issues I think that also could be concerned, that we can concern with, is that it's not just a question of a Muslim ban, it's a question of how we treat Muslims and Arabs, law enforcement treats them here in the country, because again, of the culture that has been created. On that same note, one of the failings, I think, of the Obama administration that we now can take a fresh look at is what was called countering violent extremism, which opened the door to practices that were basically, we learned them or said that we were learning them from Britain. And I argued at the time, we don't have lessons to learn from Britain. They got lessons to learn from us. We're the inclusive society. We're the one that 2 generations later doesn't call people immigrants or Pakis, or the way that the British treat you don't come from Pakistan and become British. You do come from Pakistan and become American. There's a fundamental difference in how we've dealt with diversity, and it's good. And we should use that and put it into practice. And yet I found that the culture that was created first in the White House and then in DHS and then in law enforcement was basically to see Muslims through the eyes of the security lens. So even when the president would go to speak at a mosque, he would have to have a section of the mosque address focus on you are the front line against extremism and terrorism. I'll never forget one of the debates in 2015. Hillary Clinton was asked why she went to a mosque, and she said they're the front line against terror. We've got to talk to our Muslim community. And Martin O'Malley, who was running at the time, when asked, he said, "I want to say something. You know why I go to the mosque? I go to the mosque because they're my neighbors, they're my friends, they're my constituents, and I respect them." And I thought, that's the answer that America needs to give, not the we need to talk to you because you're the front line against terrorism. 2 other issues. Minorities in the Middle East. David talked about that a bit, and Debbie talked about the issues of religious freedom, et cetera, in the region. But I think that the Trump administration made a huge I think, mistake, not just more than a mistake, it was they were playing a partisan political game with sort of singling out Christian minorities for preferential treatment, which if you talk to the religious leadership in the region, in the Middle East, they would say, please don't do that to us. It puts a bullseye on our back. We don't need to be treated that way. We want democracy, equality, and full citizenship rights in the countries that we come from. And so one of the issues that we have to look at when we address religious freedom questions is, are we helping or hurting? And then all too often we've been hurting in the last 4 years by saying we're going to take aid money away from countries as a whole so that, you know, Iraqis didn't get it as a whole. Christians and Yazidis got it in a specialized way. It made them to be viewed with suspicion. I think we need to have a more respectful approach to dealing with minorities and with majority communities in the Middle East on religious freedom questions. And I think a dialogue in this country on those issues, I think, would be really important moving forward. And one last thing, I remember during the campaign, Josh, we had an event, an Arab American event on with the LGBTQ community. People say, why are you doing that? That's your community's not really supportive of those issues and whatever. It was critical that we address it. It was critical that we address it in the community. And it turned out to be quite important and substantial. And I think that sometimes we tend, when we do faith outreach, to speak only to those who agree with us. It's really important that we change the discussion to reaching out to create a broader discussion with people who don't necessarily agree with us, with whom we have to have that conversation. We need to have a conversation on issues like gay, lesbian rights, like abortion, like a whole range of issues that we kind of sort of compartmental. We talk to them about this and we don't talk to them about that. And it only creates the divide, makes the divide even deeper. I believe that we have an opportunity coming out of the nightmare of the last 4 years to try to do the tough thing of having a respectful conversation with communities across the board. I mean, I remember one time Dan Berrigan, David, you might like this. He went to speak at an ADL conference and he talked to them about Palestinian rights. And they went crazy. I mean, they were like, why did he do it or whatever? And so he got invited to an Arab American event and he came and talked to them about anti-Semitism. And when it was over, I went up to Dan, who I'd known from college, and I said, Dan, wow, why'd you do that? He said, listen to me, Zogby, if you ever learn one lesson, he said, never talk to a group about what they want to hear. Tell them what they need to hear. And that's the prophetic voice of Dan Berrigan, but it also can be the prophetic voice that we take as a new administration coming in with faith outreach, not just talking to ourselves, but talking to others, sometimes talking about the tough things, sometimes listening, Josh, as you said, I mean, listening, why do they have those fears? Why do they have that anxiety? What do they need to hear from us to understand better how we become this one society that operates in the image of God? And that may be one of the real contributions we can make as we move forward. And so I'll stop there and thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zogby. Lots of great conversation in the chat. Please make sure you follow along and click on those links and see what folks are doing and up to. There's also some Q&A. If panelists want to chime in there and answer where they can, that'd be great. And my distinct pleasure is to introduce our next panelist, Bishop Yvette Flunder. She's an unapologetic disciple and proponent of the radically inclusive love of Jesus, who has raised her voice for justice from the church house to the White House and steps of the Supreme Court. She's the founder of City of Refuge UCC, founded in 1991 in San Francisco. She is also the presiding bishop of the Fellowship, founded in 2000 and renamed the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries in 2011. It's a multi-denominational coalition of over 100 primarily African-American Christian leaders and laity, representing churches and faith-based groups from all parts of the US and extending in around the world. She's also a keynote speaker for the White House observation of the 26th anniversary of World AIDS Day in 2014. She's a bishop, she's a friend, she's a pastor to pastors and people of no faith in all particular faiths. So I'm really grateful for Bishop Flunder to join us today. Bishop.
Of course, it is my joy and privilege to be here with my brethren, Josh, and also with Dr. Fred, Reverend Fred, Reverend Adam, all my brothers by another mother, and all of the colleagues that I'm meeting for the first time today. What a joy and a privilege to share. I've enjoyed everything that I've heard. I'd like to share just a moment from a passage of scripture from Ephesians' 2nd chapter, 14th and 15th verse. It says, "For Christ is our peace, who has made two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in the flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God." We are, in fact and indeed, a divided nation. And there are many people of faith who currently claim God as their hero and also as the enemy of those that they abhor. People construct systems and laws and choose leadership that supports the exclusivity that they desire. There's constantly something being created to reinforce exclusionary religious clauses, as many feel they are not important until they are exclusive, a part of something other people cannot join. Like the lyrics of the popular song, "I'm in with the in crowd. I go where the in crowd goes. I'm in with the in crowd, and I know what the in crowd knows." It seems that importance and exclusivity go together, particularly in the present atmosphere. And much like the time of the Civil War between the states, there were those who have actively been building fresh new walls of racism and gender bias, sexual orientation bias, classism, education access preference, nationality, political parties, denominational realities, political opinion realities. Some who identify, by the way, as conservative Christians are not sure how I and others like me, who are simultaneously Black, women, same gender loving, what I call the whole trifecta. I used to say when I went to the White House often that when I was invited to the White House, they had a checklist. You had to have somebody Black, somebody female, somebody gay, and they could send one ticket and cover a whole table of needs, because the reality was we represented so many things at the same time. And then to add to this trifecta, people like me who are also clergy, African American, raised in classical Pentecostal environments, and is truly a non-biblical literalist in the time in which we live. I'm an embracer of Holy Writ, but I have been able to parse out those things that were situational and connected to a time, and to liberate myself, which was the greatest mission of my life. Now, how can I exist? The point is that I do exist. And by the way, I don't exist alone. There are significant numbers of people who in their relationship with God found freedom and gift freedom in the lives of others. Lots of doctors among us, by the way. I want to say that to my sister, Dr. Jill Biden. And we will not be denied, dismissed, diminished, or disregarded, especially in the name of God. We're no longer afraid, and we shall not be moved. In my marriage of 37 years to my spouse, Shirley Miller, the voice of the song, "Oh Happy Day," in case you wonder who God blessed me with, we have survived the past administration. Our marriage survived this past administration. And trust me, if we could survive this past administration intact, I am convinced that all things are possible with God, and we shall not be moved. So I suggest we consider the hard work of embracing a faith and policy path that is rooted in inclusion as its first priority. making the table of God and good wide enough and big enough to find our common denominators and our ability to thrive together. Religion must be more than what we can't do together. It must model what we are empowered to do together with and for the divine of our understanding. And imagine if our temples, our churches, our mosques would cease to be secret societies, but transparent spaces of welcome, inclusivity, and community. Imagine if our places that are sanctified and set apart for worship had glass walls that we could see through, and we could feel and embrace one another in ways that are genuinely respectful and inclusive in every way. Imagine if that could happen. I vision that world where our faith paths merge in beautiful ways, not like a puree, you know the difference, but like a stew, where the individual ingredients are distinct, but we are all in the pot together. And somehow our skills, our money, our education, our theologies, our assets could be focused on creating a better world, as versus destroying the only one we have. We've got to change the dynamic that suggests that people of faith are just anti. We are more than anti. The basic foundation of most of what we believe has to do with our Creator being loving and caring and inclusive. We've got to say more about what that means and push ourselves beyond being bifurcated in some way. There is no us and them, there is only us. There is no other home than the earth. There is no us and them. We inhabit the same place. There is only us. We are more inclusive as we choose to be less exclusive. Can I say that again? We are more inclusive as we choose to be less exclusive. And many of our ancestors, with the exception of the natives of this land, were once strangers, as my sister Debbie said just a moment ago. Food, shelter, education, safety should be the right for all. And it takes a greater commitment to care and provide for born children than it does to spend millions of dollars seeking to care for unborn children. In fact, a small portion of the funds raised for the unborn could make a huge difference in the lives of born children. There is love, there is peace, there is justice, inclusion in all of our holy writ. This is the heart of the divine. The heart of the divine is not to find our differences and exploit them. The challenge for all of us as people of faith is to cross the difficult aisles. And I'll say it another way, in a class that I teach sometime in the seminaries, I say that I can objectify anyone I choose to as long as I put a large enough distance between me and that person. And oftentimes in the classes that I teach, I will get a brother who is a person of European descent. And I'll say, come here to me, brother, and he'll come to me. And I'll stand across from him about 12 or 15 feet and I'll say, there's a white man. You know how white men are. And I have a litany of things that are the perceived notions of a white man. And then while I am talking about those perceived notions, I ask him to imagine what was he taught were the perceived notions about me as a woman of African descent and as a same gender loving woman. And then he'll say that back to me. And then we walk over to one another and I take the initiative and the risk and put my arms around him and hold him for a minute. And pretty soon he can feel my heartbeat. And pretty soon I can feel his. And in that moment, we make the decision that we are going to be connected to one another by virtue of our humanity. If I don't choose to objectify him, I can call him brother. If he does not choose to objectify me, he can call me sister. We have an opportunity. Many thanks to all of you who are on this call, to those who have served the faith initiatives with and through the Biden administration. I'm a woman of hope, and I sing a song in our community. We say, we shall not be moved, like a tree planted by the rivers of water. We shall not be moved because the peace of God is marching. We shall not be moved. God bless you today, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Bishop. I know that Josh has to bounce, but we wanted to just give him an opportunity to give us just kind of a brief kind of way in which we can stay involved and follow along and be helpful. Josh?
Thanks, Adam. And I hope that everyone who's tuning in will just join me in acknowledging that all the folks in this panel are national treasures. Just amazing words, y'all. Bishop, Dr. Almontaser, Dr. Zogby, Rabbi Saperstein, Fred and Adam for your tireless work, and just so grateful for the chance to listen in and get these incredible expert recommendations around things that we need to be considering as we move forward for the next 4 years. I could listen to this group talk for a very, very long time. And Bishop Flunder, I can listen to you preach for forever. So thank you all for being a part of this. I just want to say a few things. First, I'm going to put some things in the chat right now that I mentioned earlier in terms of our website. Oh, whoops, I think I did that too. All panelists, my apologies. In a sense, all panelists and attendees. So just some of the links that I mentioned earlier, so folks have those on hand. And then I just want to say a few things. One is I think you heard today, and one thing that I hear all the time is just how much common ground there is to work on together, and how much opportunity there is right now in this moment, even though these different narratives are portrayed and there is clearly division in our country, there is opportunity to collaborate and to come together as people, as folks who are created in Imago Dei, and as people who are committed to the hard work and to the justice that you've heard people talk about. So I continue to hear that. I am deeply heartened, and I think you've seen from President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris a number of priorities that they are going to pursue right away that just have tremendous support from across the board. So we're eager to work with you all on that. I also want to give a special shout out to our secular friends who are on this call and who are tuning in, and just want to make sure we explicitly say that this inclusive work only happens when it's done in partnership between people of all beliefs as well as our secular community. So really, really grateful for you all and for the conversations we've already had, and just for the work that you're doing for justice and peace, and excited to engage and work with our religious and our non-religious and our secular friends as we pursue so many of the same priorities together. I also just want to say as well that, I know that folks have heard the president-elect talk about having a historically diverse cabinet. I just want you all to know that as we are putting together recommendations for what any engagement around, initiatives that are focused on interfaith work, that are focused on things similar to the White House Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships in the past, that is an aspiration and a commitment for historic diversity across the board in those roles. So I just wanted to, I know that a lot of folks who are tuning in today have a vested interest in that, and just want you to know that is a key priority and something that we are deeply, deeply committed to. And then the final thing is, some of the things that we're looking at right now are clear, concrete ways to start working together on day one at 12:01 p.m. on January 20th. And so we're going to be talking more about that in future conversations. But right now, there are a lot of things the president-elect and vice president-elect have talked about that you've heard echoed through the conversations today and on our previous Zoom call last week. Things that you've heard talked about from our our leadership and things that you've seen prioritized. And so, we are really trying to think through what does it look like to start doing work together on day one. Obviously we're working on listening and engaging and things like that, but our country's facing so many challenges and just can't wait. And so whether it's working together on COVID-19 response, where so many folks in this community are just playing a critical role already, and where we can really galvanize people by bringing them together even more, whether it's working on responding to systemic racism in immediate and urgent ways, because it requires nothing less, or whether it is working on healing divides and bridge building, and really thinking through how can we intentionally and proactively work towards the things that all of our panelists talked about today, where we acknowledge and recognize and embrace our common humanity, as well as our differences, so that we can bend that great moral arc of the universe in the right direction. So thank you all for having us. Excited to dive into these things in conversations to come. Just again, a tremendous thanks to Dr. Almontaser, to Dr. Zogby, to Bishop Flunder, to Rabbi Saperstein, to Fred, and to Adam for this amazing conversation, taking so much away, and just so inspired by y'all. And thanks everyone for joining today.
Thanks, Josh. We're going to hang on for a couple more minutes with a couple questions, and we know that Josh is committed to seeing the questions that come in. So if folks need to go, we understand. I totally understand, including our panelists, because we were only committed to an hour. But we're going to hang on for a couple more minutes, and I'm really delighted to bring in Reverend Chloe Breyer, who is at the Interfaith Center in New York City. Just trying to, here we go. Which is so great to have Chloe join us. First cut my teeth in advocacy work on the MDGs back in, gosh, so long ago, 2000. In fact, I have our Micah Challenge artwork up here. So Chloe, if you're there, we'd love to have you ask a question.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the panelists, and particularly this theme of fighting hate crimes and the regularization of right now, hate crimes are a kind of, they're I guess you can choose to report them or not, depending on the state that you're in. But what it would be exciting about a national, across the board federal effort would be that hate knows neither partisan, doesn't know partisan politics, in the sense that you can have, it cuts across our sort of stereotypes often of who is the quote unquote extremist. And so this might be a really sort of straightforward way to make a big difference across the country when it comes to fighting hate. The other thing is that I do hope in the category of racism that immigration is counted, because underneath the atrocities that we have seen committed by ICE and our immigration system, race has been at the heart of it. And then finally, our experience at the Interfaith Center of New York is that interfaith work is the key ingredient to strong civil society. And I just would like to venture the idea, and I'm not quite sure what category this fits under, but that a revived effort at civics education incorporate interfaith work. And I just hold up the census as an incredible example of a multi-faith effort that brought groups that are so often in New York sort of secluded unto themselves into the public square in a very creative way, and learning that your civics responsibility go hand in hand with your responsibilities as a faith leader and faith community. So I'm wondering if someone could comment on that, if you'd like.
Just on this, on the reporting issue, if you write to my office, I left my email in the chat box. It's jzogby, Z-O-G-B-Y, at aaiusa.org. Last year, they compiled a report on all 50 states' legislation that currently exists in the states on hate crime reporting, as well as on the federal level, and made recommendations outlining the inadequacies, both on the federal level, but also on the state levels. And the legislation is also available. It's the Jabara Hire No Hate Act to improve reporting on the federal level. So the office would send you the link to the report. It's fairly extensive. It's several hundred pages long, But it does outline the states, the federal government, and also the inadequacies in reporting requirements and opportunities for reporting that exist on all levels. And one of the problems on the federal level, of course, is that especially with Muslims and Arabs, recent immigrants, the people you have to report to are the very people that you're sometimes most afraid of. And I remember when we went to see Attorney General Ashcroft and said, is there any way you can separate this out, or at least create a situation like if you're a woman reporting a rape and they find marijuana in your place, they can't connect the two, right? They simply deal with the crime you're reporting. And Ashcroft waxed indignant, shouted at me, and he said, "You're asking me to excuse crimes." And I said, "No, I'm asking you to allow people to report crimes." And so, you know, there are problems here that need to be looked at. And I think you'll find the report useful in that regard.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add to that, you know, as Dr. Zogby said, the underreporting is astonishing. You know, there are actually police departments, over 70 police departments serving populations of more than 100,000 that have reported 0 hate crimes. So there is definitely a huge discrepancy between the FBI and local law enforcement, and that needs to be addressed because we need this to be across the board. But in addition to that, you know, for the most vulnerable communities, right, in our country, people who are undocumented, people who are afraid to go to law enforcement, there needs to be another mechanism. And I believe that the faith community could play a role in providing that other mechanism of reporting hate crimes. Many people are connected to a congregation. If they are able to share this with their religious leader, and that religious leader is able to help them navigate how to report it without revealing their identity. These are things that we really need to start looking at to figuring out how we can make sure that we have a really solid count on an annual basis. To the point that you talked about, Chloe, about interfaith work is really important. You know, the push for religious literacy from K to 16 is really critical. It's, you know, helping children as early as kindergarten, you know their classmate, what their rituals are, how do they celebrate their holiday, you know, taking students to visit a mosque, a synagogue, you know, a Buddhist temple, a Gurdwara. All of these are learning opportunities to bridge that gap and to mitigate hate. And it's really imperative that we have the highest office in our country start pushing for religious literacy. And I believe that this religious literacy will actually create the opportunities for young people as well as adults to engage in interfaith initiatives and civic engagement initiatives that will make our country a better place to live.
I can jump in.
And just one other thing to close.
Bishop and then Rabbi. Yeah.
And I'm sorry. And that is that of the many different councils I've been a part of and boards that I've been a part of that are interfaith, the fact that someone represents a faith group does not mean that they have a mind and a heart for public policy.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people are on those boards simply because they represent an interfaith group or a faith group. I think it's important to have sort of a secondary or a tertiary something or other that also needs to be present when folks come and gather around and discuss things as interfaith people. I am not monolithic and any more than any of the other folks that are here. There are other things that we also represent. So we have to give some thought to what the full package a person is bringing when they are coming to be a part of an interfaith group. And then we could have different interfaith groups for different reasons and different circumstances, so that the secondary or tertiary experience that person has can also be helpful in making some recommendations and decisions as relates to being part of an interfaith group.
So a couple of observations. One is, of the maybe 200 either speeches or panels that I've been honored to be part of since the COVID crisis began in the Zoom world that we all live in, I don't think I've ever seen chat comments, questions that are more interesting, more intellectually rich and morally rich than the comments on this chat line. And I just want to thank everyone for the input that they've given here. I want to pick up on what Chloe Breyer said on the second point she raised about race and the position of the role of race in all of this. I say this acknowledging there are always, when we're dealing with poverty, there are millions and millions of white Americans who have been left out of globalization's benefits, left behind by the technological revolution, many living in rural areas in abject poverty here that have to be part of any discussion on economic justice. But having said that, race is so much involved in this. The COVID-19 crisis so disproportionately affecting communities of color, and particularly the African American and the Native American community, that on almost every score are left behind and left out of so much of what is strong in this country. Here, we didn't mention the environmental crisis. If we don't deal with this, if the administration doesn't deal with this early and firmly, it is a crisis that can devastate everything for us. And again, it is poor countries, often countries of color, predominantly color, that are the least the cause of this crisis and most devastated by it. It's our communities here in America that are most devastated by it, the Native American communities of color. I mean, down the road, this moment on the racial issues is an opportunity for the world and for our nation to finally come to grips with racism, structural racism that exists in so many aspects of our criminal justice, our education, our job, our healthcare provisions, etc. If we don't deal with it, if we let this get away from us, your history will look back on this moment as one of the great failures of the human race. And I just want to pick up on what Chloe said and just lift that up as just a central filter through which we have to look at almost everything that we're addressing today.
Thank you so much for the question, Chloe. Really grateful. I'm going to bring on one more special guest, but before I do that, I want to read this question that came in that I think is really important, and we want to make sure that Josh and the team hear, and that's from Rajagopal. As an Indian American immigrant and as a Hindu, I am grateful to America for welcoming all faiths and cultures to make this their home. India of the past too welcomed all cultures and faiths, some of them fleeing religious persecution elsewhere. But today the Modi government is trying to turn India into an exclusive Hindu Rashtra and render its over 200 million minorities into second-class citizens. The question is this: will the Biden team apply his call, silence his complicity to India, and call it egregious violations of religious freedom and human rights, and acknowledge that India divided against itself can never be a reliable partner? Anybody on the panel want to just add to that? We know that religious freedom is, in the past administration, the outgoing administration has been more about religious privilege. And so I'm curious if anybody wants to add to this question, or I can just send it on to Josh.
I've already spoken about the growth of autocracies across the globe and our failure to try and strengthen democratic institutions and democratic groupings and to stand up for human rights. A lot of countries that are allies of ours fit into that category with tendencies that are greatly alarming. And so in every place that this is occurring, I hope this administration will be more effective, more thoughtful and strategic about how to strengthen democracy, how to strengthen interfaith tolerance, how to strengthen pluralism in all of these, in human rights in all of these nations.
Thank you, Rabbi. We've got one final question from Sarah Levin, who's joining us. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity. I'm Sarah Levin with Secular Democrats of America. We were thrilled to work with Josh to launch Humanists for Biden, which was chaired by Greg Epstein, the humanist chaplain at Harvard at MIT, who I'm sure many of you know. For those of you who aren't aware, the religiously unaffiliated is now the largest and fastest growing religious demographic in the country, making up about 1 in 4 Americans. About 6% of Americans identify as atheists, 6% as agnostic. This whole group of non-religious folks is very, very young. So very important future cohort of voters that we should seek to understand and reach. So my question, I'm going to ask my question, then I have a comment to just add a little bit of color to the question. So the question is, how can we ensure that the humanist and non-religious community is meaningfully included by the incoming Biden-Harris administration? So I just want to quickly note that when I say meaningful, I say that because right now a lot of folks in our community feel at worst excluded and stigmatized. It's still difficult in a lot of parts of the country to be openly non-religious. At best, we feel like an afterthought. And so I want to use this opportunity to encourage folks on this call and in the interfaith community to use more inclusive language whenever possible. It really only takes little things like saying interfaith instead of faith, or all faiths and none, faith and secular. We're starting to use language like coalition of conscience to describe like this, that is coming together around shared values, because the non-religious have values. We have sincerely held beliefs. Our faith in humanity is what drives us to join coalitions like this. And I would point to the Brookings report that was mentioned earlier, authored by Melissa Rogers and E.J. Dion, as an excellent example of how to use inclusive language so that the non-religious feel included. Would love to hear from this.
Such an important word. Anybody on the panel want to?
Yeah, I need to start us off, and I just want to say thank you, Sarah, for bringing this to our conscious. You know, in all my presentations, and those who know me, I always say, you know, people who are of faith and no faith. It's really important to be inclusive and really make sure that when we are addressing audiences, not to make assumptions. The only assumption that we can all make, and it is accurate, is that we are all humans, that we bleed the same way, we cry the same way, and that is our humanity. So it's really, really important for us to emphasize the importance of making sure that there is always a seat at the table for everybody, you know, in whatever shape, way that they identify as human beings. So I'll end there and let others chime in.
No, increasingly during the Obama-Biden administration, when I was heading the International Religious Freedom Office, we were always talking about freedom of religion and belief here, and always talked about those of all religions and no religion. And they're listed in every country, every report, what their status is. Too often they face even more persecution than religious minorities or disfavored religions do, here, because they kind of threaten the entire schema of religion. So they really are lifted up. This administration actually has continued that in their reporting here, and increasingly has been engaging with the term religion, for freedom of religion and belief as well. So I'm confident the Biden administration will continue to do so. I think you heard from Josh the shout out on it, and I think that represents a very sincere feeling in the administration as a whole. I know many of the key people who already hold positions or talked about for positions feel very strongly on this issue, Sarah. So thank you for lifting it up.
And I would, I want to highlight it too, just sort of from the perspective of another role I'm privileged to have, and David, that is serving on the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. And I've actually adopted a secular humanist in Nigeria as a religious prisoner of conscience, but he's a humanist, and he's in prison, actually in prison for blasphemy and apostasy, because he is a secular humanist. So that point of view, that inclusiveness will continue to be, will be promoted, at least from the USERF angle with the new administration. And as Rabbi Saperstein said, there is reason to not only be hopeful, but to know that this administration will be open and responsive and will build on and expand on what's already been done in that regard.
A quarter of the countries of the world have blasphemy laws on the books. 10 of them have death penalties that attach to it, and atheists constantly are running afoul of blasphemy laws. So I'm really proud that you're doing that, Fred. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much.
And you know, we talk always in the fellowship about radical inclusivity and extravagant grace and relentless hospitality. But even the radically inclusive are vulnerable to being exclusive almost by accident. It does happen. So thank you. And I pray that the generations that you represent will keep us, all of us, on check to make sure that we are being in every way, as inclusive as our creator and or as our understanding of life gives us the strength and the ability to do. So thank you so very much for speaking up.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We know that the Biden administration had a very important role around faith-based and neighborhood partnerships, which is Big Tent multi-faith and no particular faith. And we urge you to check out Melissa Rogers' study on that and recommendations at the Brookings Institute with EJ Dion. I dropped it in the chat. You can also find it online. Really grateful for this panel, really important conversation that we will continue to have. And as folks that are on the outside of the transition, but working with the transition to make sure that we build back better faith-rooted and no particularly faith-rooted change in this country. So we thank you so much. I want to hand it over to Reverend Fred Davie to close us out.
I just want to say thank you to everybody, to our panelists for your incredible contributions, not only today, but what you've done throughout your lives. The country owes you a big debt, and we really appreciate all that you do. And I personally appreciate the way in which you respond to the call when we ask you to join these conversations. Again, I want to thank Josh Dickson for his leadership in getting us organized to have these conversations with the Biden-Harris transition. I want to thank the Biden-Harris transition for being open to these conversations. Thanks to all the people who both registered. We had over 1,100 people registered. Looks like we had about 600 or 700 people tune in today, which is just absolutely wonderful and incredible. All that means a more rich, diverse, and hopefully productive and compassionate and loving nation. And then finally, Adam, thank you. You've been a great partner. Miles to go before we rest, but I can't think of a better person and a better group of people that I'd rather be on this journey with. So thank you so much.
Stay safe and have a happy, festive holiday season with you and yours. Blessings.
Thank you.